incredible privilege of having Professor Danielle Miller of Malpica speak with us today. I'll say a little bit about it in a second. I'll say about him. So he is a professor in our Chicano Latino Studies department, certainly a professor in our own program. We love him. You know him as your faculty in residence, I think. He has a great deal of expertise in areas of Latino policy and sociology, the mix of race and labor, the demography of poverty in this country, much, much more. He is winner of the coveted SSU Teaching Award for 2010. He's a master teacher and a great, great guy. We have been looking at identity from the standpoint of various cultural influences lately on conversations of various artistic media, art, literature, music. Before that, we addressed identity from the standpoint of physical and biological sciences. Today, we're shifting in the direction of the social science. These are those fields that strive to use the discipline of language of science to look closely as possible at this crazy thing we call human life. Okay? Professor Malpica will teach us a bit about the history of immigration in this country. All of us on this continent, even the Native Americans who first came, come here as a result of immigration. All of us have aspects of our identities that were created in very old countries from which our families sprung. All of us, in various ways, hold in our bones and our deep memory the experience of immigration. Please welcome the master teacher and exemplar colleague in the MBA program, Danielle Miller.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Scott. Can you guys hear me all the way back there? Yes. I want to do this without them. So yes, we can hear. You guys can hear me? So wonderful. All right, so I want to start my lecture today by sort of talking a little bit about why this is important to me. And I want to start by mentioning that I'm very passionate about this topic because in part I'm an immigrant. I actually came to the United States when I was 18 years old to study the university just like you guys. And my immigration history goes back to my mother. My mother was an immigrant. She was an undocumented immigrant for many, many years. She actually worked the fields of Texas. She was a nanny. She was a dishwasher. Many, many different types of activities dealing with Mexican migrants and issues dealing with illegality. So this is a very, very personal topic for myself. And part of the reason why I really like this topic is that I'm sort of understanding my mother's history and in part also my history as an immigrant. Of course, we're also going into this topic of immigration because it's really, really connected to our novel, the novel of Middlesex. So as I'm actually talking and lecturing, I want all of us to be thinking about Lefty and Desdemona, the moment that they actually left the old country and they actually went to the new country. So I really want us to sort of think about how different was the European immigrant experience of 100 years ago to that of the immigration experience of those folks like that of my mother. All right, the first thing that I want to tell you is more or less the 4 or 5 key points that I want to deliver today. So the first is this: why is immigration important? So that's something that all of us should be sort of paying attention as I'm actually lecturing. The second point is this: what are the numbers? How many, in fact, have migrated on a global context? And also the numbers actually coming to the United States. The third point has to do with comparing old immigrants with new immigrants. And I'm going to go in detail explaining what that difference is. But just think about this. Old immigrants are European immigrants coming to the United States. The new immigrants are Latin American migrants and Asian migrants. So we'll be comparing and contrasting those really, really important immigrant waves. And then lastly, I want to finalize the latter part of my lecture by talking a little bit about why is it that immigrants come? And specifically, why is it that they come from Latin America, and particularly, why is it that they come from Mexico? So those are the 4 points that I really want to deliver today. All right, let me start off by talking a little bit about why immigration is important. I want to start emphasizing that globalization is very connected to this issue of immigration. We live in a globalized society. Communication has accelerated because of globalization. Capital flows have accelerated because of globalization. Tourism, I ask my students all the time, raise your hand, what are some of the places that you've actually traveled? And I'm floored because a lot of you have been to many different parts of the world. And this is in part because of this issue of globalization. Trade is also important. We usually do this exercise in one of our lectures where we take a look at where our clothes are made, and literally they're from all parts of the world now. So trade is also connected to this issue of globalization. And of course, people. People are on the move, they're going from one place to another, and many of them live in a place where, in fact, they weren't born. So immigration is affecting many countries, but specifically, the countries that are being affected by immigration are the developed countries, what are referred to as first world countries. And this is a reality of developed nations. It is a reality that we have people going from the south to the north, from developing countries to developed countries. And many of these migrants are in fact undocumented. This is the reality of developed nations. So if you go to Australia, if you go to Canada, if you go to Germany, most of these countries have immigration and they also have undocumented immigration. Another reason why immigration is so important is because it has transformed the United States. It literally has transformed the United States. And specifically since the 1960s. We'll learn that contemporary immigrants have come to the United States starting in 1965. And we have two regions of the planet where we see a massive migration to the United States, from Asia and also from Latin America. And because we have this influx of migrants from those parts of the world to the United States is not the same. So just think about issues dealing with race. In the past, we would always think about a sort of binary, no? Blacks and also whites. With the influx of these contemporary migrants, things have changed in terms of issues dealing with race. Now we have to sort of think about how Asians fit into this picture, how Asian Americans fit into this sort of discussion dealing with race. And of course, Latinos, Latin Americans coming in very important numbers to the United States. The other reason why immigration is important is because it's extremely controversial. Part of the reason why I love this topic is that everybody has sort of a gut reaction to it, no? You want my students to sort of open up, have a little debate between the pros and cons of immigration, and everybody wants to participate, no? So this is extremely, extremely controversial. Let me talk a little bit about numbers. And again, here I'm talking about on a global scale, and then I'm going to go into the specifics into the United States. So again, I can't emphasize this enough. Immigration is a global phenomenon. When we're thinking about immigration in the United States, Mexican migration is extremely important. This is referred to as the browning of the United States. But European countries are also being impacted by migration. So countries like Italy are receiving very important numbers of migrants into Italy. People from Africa are going into Italy. People from the Middle East are going into Italy. People from China are going into Italy. And the same thing with Spain. During the last 15 years or so, Spain historically sent migrants to all parts of the world. Now it's the complete opposite. Many people want to go to Spain. Latin Americans go to Spain in very important numbers. Asians go to Spain in very important numbers, and of course, Africans. All right, let's talk a little bit about just numbers as a whole. And notice that these numbers are contemporary, from the 1970s to 2010. Notice that phenomenal jump. In 1970, we had 82 million people who were living outside of their country of birth. That's very, very significant. But notice how it's actually incremented by the decades. And notice that between 1990 and 2005, we have almost a 60% increment. So this sort of explosion, a demographic explosion of people going to other parts of the world. This is data coming from the United Nations report. All right, so what does that 214 million mean? It's hard to sort of grasp, no? So I thought it would make a lot of sense to think about it this way. This is 1 out of every 35 people in the world are in fact a migrant. That's very significant, no? 1 out of 35 people in the world is a migrant. But notice this is only 3% of the population. We're thinking globally here. The last time I lectured on this issue, one of my students raised their hand and said, you know what, Professor Malpica, why are you making such a big deal if 3% is not very significant? Well, he really made me think, which usually my students make me do, and I thought about doing this. That 3% is equivalent to the population of Brazil. And for those of you who don't know, Brazil is huge, and it has a very, very important population. It's the 5th largest country in terms of population. So that gives you an idea of the breadth and magnitude of people who are in fact migrants. Let's talk a little bit about proportions. So in terms of Europe, we are talking roughly around 10% of all Europeans, 10% of Europeans are in fact immigrants. Very significant, and the numbers are increasing. Today, in the United States, I have this at 2011, 2015, it's around 15%, 1/5, of all those individuals living in the United States are in fact immigrants. 15% of the population. All right. Another really important point that I want to make today is this, that yes, there are many, many immigrants coming to the United States, and I want to make the point of the following, that immigrants who are coming to the United States also in very important numbers 100 years ago. Very important numbers. And I want to sort of compare and contrast both immigrant waves, and I have 2 questions, 2 guiding questions that really are connected to this segment of my presentation. And these are the questions. Is history repeating itself? Are the current immigrants today coming to the United States, is their experience similar to that of old immigrants? Think about the Stefanists. Are they similar to today's immigrants? And part of my response to that is there are incredible level of similarities. Many, many similarities. But I also want to make the second point, that there are also very significant differences. And we will be talking about the important significant differences between contemporary immigrants and also the old immigrants. So my second question is, what is new about U.S. immigration today? Why is this comparison important? Well, the comparison is really, really important for this. We tend to romanticize the old immigrants, the European immigrants. I hear this all the time. My ancestors came, they learned English, and they made it. And it's always in relationship to this. Today's immigrants, they don't learn English, they don't want to assimilate, and they have not made it. No? So I think it's really, really useful to sort of compare and contrast both of these immigrant waves to really capture that there are incredible similarities. Italians and Germans of the past suffer many different things of the Mexicans of today, for example. And we will be discussing that further. All right, so let me talk a little bit about the old immigrants and the new immigrants. Again, when we're talking about old immigrants, we're basically referring to Europeans coming to the United States. European coming to the United States. The time period, notice the time period, 1840 to 1920. And these are some of the countries that were very, very significant during that old wave. Italy, Poland, Greece, and many, many Russian individuals. Some of my students are part of that Russian wave. Russians couldn't practice their faith back in Eastern Europe, and they decided to migrate to the land of opportunity. So these are the old immigrants. Let me tell you a little bit more about the old immigrants. For the most part, they saw the United States as the land of opportunity. Everybody saw the United States as the land of opportunity. Immigrants were willing to take any type of job. This is key and really, really important. And think about the characters of our novel. What are some of the jobs that they did? Very, very different, no? But they were employed, and that was key and very, very important. During this time period, there was many, many jobs. The United States was going through an industrial expansion. Manufacturing jobs were in growth. So these immigrants come, Americans need workers, and it's a perfect fit. It really is a nice fit. Another important point about these immigrants is that they're extremely similar in class background. For the most part, European immigrants were working class. For the most part, not much of a difference. Almost all of them were working class. The other key issue about these immigrants is this, that when they arrived, many of these European immigrants were seen as non-white. The Italians, the Greeks, think about our novel. Think about Desdemona and how some folks go about seeing her. There's this passage in the novel of Middlesex where an African-American lady tells her, you know what, you're not white, but you're also not like me, black. You're in between. And that's exactly how these immigrants were basically perceived when they arrived. What's interesting about these European immigrants is that they eventually became white. And this is really, really interesting because many of your ancestors, the Irish, the Italians, they were not seen as white, and eventually they assimilated, they intermarried in very important numbers, and then they started being seen as white. Let me show you some photographs to sort of capture the essence of some of these old immigrants. And I'm going to have to turn off the light, so hopefully we can see a little bit better. This is really unfortunate that you really can't see with clarity this slide, but these are migrants coming from Europe, literally packed as sardines, coming to the United States. And this is what they encountered, the difficulties from the moment that they got on the boat. They're already dealing with these kind of situations. Very, very difficult to make the trek from Europe to the United States. This is what the European migrants encountered. Ellis Island. More or less in the 1900s, this was one of the first things that they were able to see. Imagine what these migrants thought the moment that they walked into Ellis Island. Very, very powerful. I always question myself, when I visit this place, what is it that they were thinking? What is it that they were hoping for? These are questions that I hope everybody's sort of thinking about. This graph, which is not the best, but I'll send all of this PowerPoint to all of your sections, it really gives you a sense of all the different countries that migrated via Ellis Island. Notice the plethora of different countries. Italy, Russia, Hungary, etc. And notice countries that you had never thought about would come through Ellis Island are in fact recorded here. The West Indies, the Ottoman Empire. Notice Greece is here. 245,000 migrants going via Ellis Island. Here's another graph, which is really, really telling. It's basically capturing when these migrants were coming by nationality, the numbers, and also the reasons. And I hope everybody pays attention to the reasons. The reasons are very diverse. Very diverse. Sometimes it has to do with some kind of economic circumstance. Sometimes it's political. Sometimes it's religious. So it varies tremendously. But I do want to invite all of you to really pay attention that the Italians and the Germans were the most important groups. The Germans are the Mexicans of today. Very significant. Notice how many Germans and Italians came. 4 million individuals for Germans and 4.5 for Italians. Here are more images of these people arriving in the East Coast. And this image really speaks to this issue of discrimination. If you cannot make sense of the cartoon, I'll walk with you and explain the cartoon a little bit much more in depth. So it reads, "The high tide of immigration, a national menace." And then you have all these individuals over here, which they look like everything but not human. They sort of look like rats, no? And they're being depicted coming into the United States. And notice, I don't know if you could actually see, but they're very, very dark-skinned. These Italian migrants, for the most part coming from the south part of Italy, were depicted very, very differently from those who are already in the United States. And notice the sign over there on the corner, "Danger to American ideas and institutions." All right, let me show you now this little video. And I hope the sound quality is okay. I've been playing quite a bit with it. At the beginning, the sound might not be that good, but please bear with me, and then I hope the sound gets a little bit better. So again, the sound is not the best right now. In a couple of minutes, the sound will be much better. So just take a look at the images. These are Greek migrants coming from Europe to the United States.
Mass immigration from Greece began in the 1890s and through to the 1920s. Mass immigration from Greece began in the 1890s emigrated to the United States. 1920s. Greece about 400,000 people emigrated country to the United States.
Sorry, didn't work. So I'll tell you what I was trying to do.
Fairly poor. A lot of people.
So I used to project this from the internet, and then all these funny commercials pop up, so I couldn't do it through the internet. So I ended up embedded in it, and of course I didn't do it successfully, but that's okay. So you got an idea of some of these images of these European immigrants. All right, so let me now talk a little bit about the new immigrants. So we've talked about the old immigrants, we're going to talk about the new immigrants. These new immigrants are from Latin America and Asia, and I can't emphasize enough the Asia part. Today in my presentation, I'm going to zero in and talk about Latin American migration, but the new immigrants are from those parts of the world, Asia and also Latin America. Notice how important they are in terms of these countries. Mexico, Philippines, India, they are in terms of number of importance from these specific nation states. And notice that they're equally significant in terms of the continents where they're coming from. And these individuals started coming in very important numbers from the 1960s to the present. From the 1960s to the present. Let me tell you a little bit more about these immigrants. They see the United States as the land of opportunity. These immigrants are also willing to take any type of job. They really are. Even though those who are professional migrants are able to sort of go below, let's say I'm a medical doctor, I'm willing to actually work in the United States as a nurse. So this is very, very common among these new immigrants. And what really is an important distinction between old and new immigrants, the new immigrants have encountered an economy of uncertainty. Sometimes very, very strong, sometimes not strong. So it's cyclical, sometimes robust, sometimes not robust. And that has affected the new immigrants in many significant ways. Something else that's key about these new immigrants is that they're non-white. That really is an important difference between the old immigrants. These individuals are African. They're black. Many of these individuals are Asian, mestizos, but they're not white. Very, very significant. The other point that's key in terms of the new immigrants is that they are perceived by the host society as not willing to assimilate. They're unassimilated. And consequently, they suffer quite a bit of discrimination. So let me walk you through and show you a couple of these images dealing with the new immigrants. So this is what new immigrants encounter. Many of these individuals who are there from using their car, coming into the United States, are probably going to come through legal means in the southern border. Please note that many of these immigrants come through legal means. That's really, really important. We're going to be focusing and concentrating quite a bit on illegality and undocumented immigrants, but many of these individuals fly into LAX, SFO, JFK, and they are professional migrants ready to work in the United States. But we will be concentrating today on this issue dealing with undocumented immigration. Like I already mentioned, many of these immigrants are from Asia. Many of them are, in fact, highly professionals. They have a lot of education. They have master's degrees and PhDs, and they have very, very significant employments. There are Latin American migrants that are professionals, and also Asians who are, in fact, professionals. But now I'm going to show you all these images dealing with the working class immigrants coming from Latin America to the United States. So you all probably have been hearing a lot about immigrants coming from Central America and riding these trains. They're referred to as La Bestia. This is what these individuals encounter. And they basically go from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and they go on top of these trains in all of the Mexican territory, and this is how they get to the border of the United States. Let me show you more of these images. Here are immigrants crossing. Notice how relatively easy this is. This is in the California, Baja California border. People climbing and crossing illegally. This is before the 1990s. After the 1990s, this is what that same border looked like. It's really interesting because when they were building this wall, this fortress, they found out that a lot of the workers were in fact undocumented, no? Which is really, really interesting. And many of them were actually using Mexican cement, Cemex, which is one of the most powerful companies on the planet. So that's what they were actually building this fence with. This is what the border also looks like. Let me turn off the light again. So notice the stadium lighting between Mexico and the United States. Very difficult to cross. And bear this in mind. People are patrolling this by land, by air, you name it. Very, very strict border control in the California border. California border was historically a very important part where many Latin American migrants were coming into the United States. But notice the big difference. This is California. Migrants are very resilient. If you seal that border, that's okay. We'll go around. And that's exactly what has actually happened. Notice these borders. This is the Arizona-Mexican border. If you can't tell, this is the border right here. This is it right here. And here, not even a fence, no? It basically reads, one side is the United States, the other side is Mexico. Here's another example of the border between one country and another. This is in Arizona. Yet another example, this is in New Mexico. Something that's really important about migration is that many migrants from Latin America come legally through family sponsorship. So if somebody's a US citizen, they can sponsor their immediate loved ones to come to the United States. And here we see a couple of these examples. As I already explained to all of you, many of these Latin American migrants are discriminated tremendously by US citizens. So here we have this cartoon that's sort of similar to the European cartoon, and here I have another one. Okay, now let me show you, hopefully this video will work, to sort of put this a little bit more in context.
My poor feet have traveled a long, dusty road.
Detrás de ese problema hay todo un contexto social que lo acompaña. Y ese contexto social es el que hay que entenderlo y hay que comprenderlo. Tengo mi esposa, tengo 3 niños.
Hay que pedirle a Dios que nos guíe en un buen camino, que nos...
Si en el camino me toca morir, pero estoy arriesgándome, pues. Sí.
Yes, and then we come with the dust, and we're gone with the wind.
We want them to see our lights, see our fencing.
In the same moment that people have been forced to leave their lands and move, the act of migrating has been criminalized.
See marked Border Patrol agents everywhere, see agents on bikes, see agents on horseback.
Now, the only way someone can get into the United States is to run what has functionally become a gauntlet of death.
Okay, so let me continue. That gives you an idea of the sort of difficulties that a lot of these migrants have to encounter when they come from Latin America into the United States. So one of the exercises that I want to invite all of you to do is this. Are you able to sort of compare and contrast both immigrant waves based on what I actually have been lecturing? What are the similarities? What are the differences? And again, I really want to make the case today that there are many, many similarities between both immigrant waves. Okay, this is the latter part of my lecture for today. I want to talk about why is it that Latin American migrants come to the United States, and specifically, why is it that they come from Mexico? So one of the key issues is wage employment differential. There's a big difference of what you earn in the United States and what you earn in Mexico. And many people know that you earn much more in the United States, and this is a big incentive for people to actually make the trek up north. So that's really, really important. Let me sort of illustrate this with a couple of examples. So here, you see a worker working in Mexico. If he's an unskilled worker, he's going to be earning around, he or she, $1.13 per hour. But notice that significant, important numbers in terms of how much that individual would be earning in the United States. $11.30. So there's a big differential, no? 10 to 1, roughly speaking. So this is a big attraction of why is it that many people decide to come from Mexico into the United States. Notice the other categories, the janitor. If you're going to be laboring as a janitor in Mexico, you're going to be earning less than $1. For that same occupation in the United States, you're going to be earning around, roughly speaking, $9. So again, big incentive for people to actually decide to, in fact, try to work in the United States. Notice this. I'm a sociologist by training. This is what economists really like to favor. This differential between salaries between one country and another. Sociologists don't favor this as an explanation. We do not favor this. We think this is important, but we favor these remaining points much more. Direct labor recruitment. So many of these workers have directly been recruited from Mexico to come to the United States. Employers recruit within the heart of Mexico to come to the United States, and historically, the U.S. government has also recruited Mexican migrants. The best example is the Bracero program, which a lot of you probably have heard. 1940s, the United States is fighting World War II. It needs workers, it needs agricultural workers, and it establishes this sort of agreement with Mexico to bring workers to labor in the United States. By the end of the program was called Bracero. Brazo means arm. These were agricultural workers. By the end of the program, 4 million migrants, 4 million braceros had labored in the United States. Very, very significant. Very, very significant. And in fact, many of these individuals worked around this area, in Grayton and Sebastopol, and also in Santa Rosa. Here's an example of one of these day laborers. He has his mica, his ID, that sort of tells the U.S. government that he's able to actually work in the United States. All right, migrant networks are equally significant. One of the things that I always tell my students is this: if you don't have social connections, if you don't have social relationships with somebody that's already living here in the United States, it's going to be very difficult for you to actually make the trek up north. So migrant networks are key. They're really, really important. So let me illustrate this with a couple of photographs. So here's a couple. For the most part, the man first comes, he's undocumented, later brings the wife, and then eventually the whole family, in fact, are able to actually stay here in the United States. Something that's key about these individuals is this: migrants are sojourners. They're cyclical workers. They come, they labor, and then they return back home. They eventually stay in the United States, but originally, most migrants are in fact sojourners. Let me show you more of these photographs. These are Yucatecos, people from the southern part of Mexico living here in the United States as migrants. This is some of the work that I've done with indigenous Mexicans in Los Angeles. Notice the incredible community that exists with these indigenous Mexicans. They're from the state of Oaxaca, and they're doing all sorts of cultural events and festivities there in Los Angeles. This is not Mexico, this is Los Angeles. So I love showing some of these photographs. This was a Sweet 16 celebration event of this young woman. She decided to dress this way because she's really, really proud of her indigenous roots, and she used this Ismeño dress from the coast part of Oaxaca. Notice how young these individuals are now. The party was thrown at this really beautiful restaurant called La Guelaguetza in Los Angeles. All right, another reason why people come is smuggling. There's been an explosion of the informal economy. People are coming, it's very dangerous to cross, and they depend on smugglers. And I want to show you this photograph that I got it from the actual New York Times. And it gives you an idea of how much is it that people have to pay to come to the United States. If you're coming from this part of the world, Latin America, you're going to have to pay $12,000 per individual. You're going to have to pay the smuggler that amount. If you're coming from India, $30,000, Eastern Europe, $30,000. Notice this area of China, $35,000 and $60,000. Significant amounts of money. And these migrants come in many different ways. They come through land, through sea. These are Haitian migrants being smuggled into the United States via the Florida coast. This is really interesting. So they took this sort of x-ray now of this big truck, and all of these individuals are in fact being smuggled into the United States. All right. Another key issue of why people migrate is this localized culture of immigration. people are part of a culture of migration. If you're young, it becomes a rite of passage coming to the United States. You can't become a man if you have not made the trek to work and live in the United States. So let me show you this through a number of these examples. So this is what some of these small towns in the central part of Mexico look like. This is Jalisco. This is where they cultivate tequila. You guys like tequila? This is where it actually is cultivated, the heart of Jalisco. And these are relatively small towns. They're very, very small, 2,000 individuals at the most. And they have a history of migration, 4 or 5 generations of people migrating from this area. So this is one of these braceros. He's now living in Mexico. But notice this. He migrated in the 1940s. Now his offspring are migrating also. Notice how Americanized these guys are now. Wearing the same clothes that you guys are. Okay, then there's the demand for immigrant labor. Very, very important. There's a huge demand for immigrant labor. We need these workers. We need working class, low-skilled workers. And I want to sort of touch upon what that means. So here's a chicken processing plant in Tennessee. If you like chicken, if you bought Tyson chicken, there's a big probability that you've in fact bought this, and this was butchered, processed by Mexican and immigrant hands. Here are more examples of that Tyson chicken plant. Mexicans have also been very influential in agriculture. They were very influential in the 50s and 60s, and they are today. This is 2005, 2006 roughly, in Napa. So the demand side is really, really important. Think about construction and how important these immigrants are, many of them who in fact are undocumented, laboring in all sorts of construction sites. Here are Haitians working in roofs in Florida and Mexican immigrants building houses in California. This is part of my work with day laborers in the city of Los Angeles. They are part of the informal economy. They're looking for work per day. And these types of sites are throughout the United States. And we actually have a site just like this in the city of Grayton, close to Sebastopol. Here are more examples of some of these sites. This is one of my really close respondents that I was really able to sort of work really, really nicely with. This guy taught me immensely about what it meant to be an immigrant. And of course, Mexican migrants are very, very important in the back of the house of restaurants. Busboys, dishwashers, chefs, instrumental. They are the backbone of this industry. And they're also very important in cleaning your cars and all sorts of service-oriented activities. I want to leave you with a couple of cartoons. This one reads, if you can't read it, we should tighten up the immigration and kick out all the illegals. How much is this wonderful oranges harvested without any nasty immigrant labor? $162. So think about these kind of things. What would happen if we wouldn't have these workers? Would we as consumers be willing to pay very, very expensive amounts for our produce? Here's a similar kind of cartoon. Illegals go home. I mean after you're done with the hedges. I have 5 more minutes? Yes, so bear with me. I'm going to show you parts of this really, really interesting documentary, and I hope it works. Here, I can't bring this down. How do I do this?
Scroll down.
But I don't see the scroll thing. Here we go.
algunos que van de sus países porque quieren encontrar un mejor futuro, pero en vez de encontrar un mejor futuro encuentra uno cosas que no espera uno encontrar, que le da mucha tristeza a uno porque todos vamos sufriendo. Que aquí en el camino es todo muy difícil, que peligra uno con su vida, o secuestran a uno, otros le roban a uno dinero, violaciones de mujeres, de niños, entonces se ven cosas muy feas.
Son muchos los que han secuestrado. Entonces, hacemos una fila y hay unas personas que están con su libretita pidiéndonos el teléfono de nuestro familiar. Los que dicen no me acuerdo del teléfono lo apartan. Me han dicho, me han contado, dice, uno dice que no se acordaba del número y agarraron una tijera y le cortaron un pedazo de lengua para que se acordara. O sea, los torturan hasta que ellos dicen el número de teléfono. Y si efectivamente no tiene familiares en Estados Unidos, no tiene familia quien pague su rescate, lo matan frente a ellos, lo sacan, lo hacen pedazos y luego en un tambo de 200 litros de diésel lo ponen a calentar y ahí lo meten. Y muchas veces los meten así, hasta enteros o medio vivos. Los meten en ese tambo de diésel caliente, según para que no quede huella, para que se consuma todo y ya no puedan saber quiénes son.
So let me leave it here. Please come and talk to me in the round table today. Thank you.